Hi, Loretta.
Hi,
I'm so excited to have you on today's show.
thanks. Nice to talk to you again.
Yes, we are going to be talking all about happiness today. And happiness is something that I know that you have studied a lot, and you
Yeah,
have kind of a different take on it
yeah,
than many people out there. So, can you just describe a little bit of your kind of point of view on happiness, how we can get happy, things like that?
sure. Okay, so the brain chemicals that make us feel good are inherited from earlier animals. And so they are controlled by the animal part of our brain. And when we talk about happiness in words, that's a different part of our brain, the cortex, which the animal brain can't use language. So the two brains don't talk to each other. And you can have all this philosophical theory about what should make you happy. And there's a lot of virtue signaling in that. And there's a lot of like wishing what the world were like. But when you understand the animal brain and what turns on the happy chemicals in the animal brain, it's so easy to see that that's what really people care about. And it's not what we're said that we should care about. So that's why we all struggle to manage it. Like, how can I be a good person and also be happy?
Okay, so there's the contradiction there. So can you tell me a little bit about why being a good person doesn't always make us happy and what makes us happy instead?
Sure. Well, I'm not trying to say you shouldn't be a good person. So let's start with that is there's the long run and the short run. So the animal brain, you've seen pictures of animals fighting over food. So in that moment, they want that food and the food will make them happy. And they think if I get that food, I'll be happy, not in abstract terms, but it's like, oh, I must get that food. Then if you do that in the human world, let's say bad things will happen to you in the long run. So then people go to the other extreme where they say, oh, I don't care about getting any of that food for myself. I don't want that. I did a dolphin training. I don't want to get the fish for myself. I only care about getting fish for others. And you say that with the verbal part of your brain, but I know so many people, and you probably do too, who are all bitter and resentful because they think other people are getting the fish and they're not. So it's how to get the long-term human cortex and the animal brain to work together so that effectively you could be happy with what is realistic in a crowded world where you're not the king of the world.
So how do we start to do that? Like, what are some things that we can do to kind of turn on these happy chemicals?
Sure. Well, there are four chemicals and a different thing turns on each of them. So I'll explain that. And then you'll see that it's nothing like, taking a hot bath and lighting candles. Although, that could work for somebody, but it's better to understand what's going on. So dopamine is the expectation of a reward. So it's excitement. And we want this feeling all the time, but it's not meant to be on all the time. It's meant to guide you to say, okay, this is a moment when you should invest energy. So if you invest energy into everything every minute, then you're not going to make good decisions about where to invest your energy. But then on the other hand, you go to the other extreme where like nothing seems worthwhile. It's hopeless. Why should I try? So all of these chemicals are wired from past experience. So what turns on your dopamine, gets you excited, is wired from your past dopamine experience. And that's why, but then it's hard because if I keep getting excited over the same thing, then it's not so exciting anymore. So that's why we all have a challenge, like how to use our energy and get excited about things in realistic ways. And in the modern world, the cliche is that you're not supposed to care about rewards. And many people think that they're just supposed to get high on life and not care about rewards, but that's just not how the animal brain works. So again, you challenge to integrate this.
So something like maybe sports, is that something that would, like, if the reward is scoring a goal or something like that, is that if we grew up playing sports, would that be something that kind of activates our dopamine?
So that's a great example. So that would be an example of how a person got wired to say, this is the way to get excited. If I did 20 crunches yesterday and I do 25 crunches today or whatever it is. But then you all know that if you only focus on that next athletic goal, that's not really completely fulfilling. So part of this is to understand that every goal you reach stops triggering dopamine and you keep looking for more. So that's how the brain works. There's nothing wrong with it. That's the way it's designed to work. And it's because our ancestors had to keep looking for food to not starve to death. So that's why we all have that treadmill feeling. And you have to mix it up, but also because there are these social goals for the social chemicals. So I may as well talk about them. So oxytocin and serotonin, they're two different social feelings. So one of them is sort of what we call acceptance and belonging, and the other is like social importance or prestige or pride, attention, recognition. So we want both, and there's no easy way to get them. And oops, I knocked my mic over. There's no easy way to get them. And then after you get them, the chemical is processed and eliminated and you want more. So again, this is why we all have this treadmill feeling, because that's how our brain is designed to work, is you have to keep getting more to keep feeling it.
Okay, so we want the prestige, we also want the closeness. So when people say, oh, like you shouldn't try to seek attention, well, that's what your brain is actually programmed to do. so it's
exactly. And if you try to seek attention and don't get it, then your brain sees that as a survival threat. But on the other hand, if you don't try to seek attention, then your brain says, well, it's unfair. Everybody else is getting attention.
Right. So from your perspective, what's kind of a happy medium? Like what are some ways that maybe you've seen people be able to activate these happy chemicals that are activated when you seek attention and not feel like they're going over the top or something like that?
Great question. Yeah. So this is the subject of my new book called Status Games: Why We Play and How to Stop. It's coming out in September, but it's available now. So how do you said it exactly right. It's sort of a middle lane, and that's what I focus on, the middle lane. So the fast lane is I have to be a big shot every minute. And the slow lane is nobody cares about me. I'm going to be ignored all the time. So the middle lane is I am real with myself to admit that I want attention, but when I don't get it, I know that it's not a survival threat, even though my animal brain makes it feel like a survival threat when I try to get attention and fail, because, you know, it's a long story, but if you ever watch animal videos, you know the story.
Yes. Okay, so a lot of it is kind of, it sounds like some of it is talking to ourselves, like kind of reasoning with ourselves and saying, okay, even though this feels really awful and it feels like life or death, it's actually not life or death, and I will be okay. And understanding why our brain makes us feel that way can be freeing, you know?
Exactly. And the way I call it is the two brains have to work together. It's like a horse and rider. Many people have heard that metaphor. So the horse is essential to the process. So you can't make the horse the bad guy, but then you can't make the rider the bad guy, because the rider is essential to the process. So they have to work together.
Absolutely. Okay. Yes. That makes so much more sense. So, and I think there's a fourth chemical. Have we talked about all four of them?
Yes. So the fourth chemical is endorphin. And if people have heard of runner's high, that's what it is. But the bottom line is we're not meant to seek endorphin because it's only triggered by pain. It's the body's natural opioid. And if our ancestors were injured, it would mask pain for 20 minutes so that you could get help, and then you feel the pain. So some people want to inflict pain on themselves to get it. And that only works because it distracts you, but it doesn't actually help you meet a need. So the other chemicals help you meet needs. So those are the ones we should focus on.
Okay. So, and I don't know if you mentioned runner's high. Yeah, I think you mentioned runner's high. So when you're running and you actually push your body to the limit, that's the runner's high that people talk about, but that's actually not the best way, I guess, to get a happy chemical, because you're kind of maybe damaging your body. I'm not really sure. I don't know a lot about it,
Well, the idea is habituation, that whatever you're doing, you get used to it, and then you need to inflict more pain on yourself to get it. So if it's the only form of happiness you know, then you have to keep inflicting more pain on yourself. So that's why it's so important to know that it is not the path to happiness. The three other chemicals are the path to happiness. And endorphin only works because of distraction. So distraction means that in the animal world, they only react to predators when there actually is a predator. They don't hang around worrying about predators. But the big human brain can activate a threat when it's not present. And we do this so much. And how do you interrupt it? And everybody learns a way to interrupt their bad thoughts. And whatever worked for you before will work. That's where you go. So if you learned that inflicting pain on yourself is the only way to interrupt a bad thought, then your challenge is to learn that there are thousands of other ways to interrupt bad thoughts.
Right. So having that awareness of kind of our go-to is really important, because your go-to has been cultivated maybe before you were 8 years old or in your teenage years, right? Those are kind of the big times of when your brain kind of creates these super highways that you can activate really easily. And then once you're past your teenage years, the challenge becomes creating new highways. Is that right?
Exactly, because there's this chemical called myelin, which insulates neurons the way insulation on a wire makes them super efficient. So in the years you mentioned, we have a lot of myelin. That's when children form the major neural networks. So whatever your go-to was is because it worked in your past. There's no intellectualizing where you decided that this was a strategy. And it's not that society, it's whatever worked in your past, built a pathway that said, wow, that works. And I use the example that if a monkey is chased by a lion and climbs up a tree, then the next time it smells a lion, it looks for trees. So whatever worked in your past, you're just looking for that today.
So, as a parent, what are some of the things that we can help our kids to do to kind of, because I saw something, I wanted to dig further into it in your, on your website. It was something about, things you wish you had known when your kids were growing up about how they learn, right? And I think this has to do with the reward system. So can you explain a little bit more about that?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we often reward bad behavior with our children because we don't want them to suffer. We project our own suffering onto them. So often what this means is if a kid has a meltdown, then you drop everything and you're all nice to them. And their brain says, oh, that worked. And I know it sounds crass, and it's not that they're consciously trying to manipulate you, but if you're otherwise busy doing your own thing, and then the minute the child has a meltdown, you drop everything and you're all nice, then their brain learns that. So the alternative, of course, is to reward them when you see the behavior you want. Now that's hard because the idea is, let's say your child is doing something good. You're not supposed to interrupt them doing something good because that's sort of undermining them building the pathway to do that good thing. But in subtle ways, you have to control yourself to not reward bad behavior and to find ways to reward the behaviors you like.
Oh, that's so helpful. I find myself doing that with my 2-year-old. Well, when she says I'm scared, I go and give her a hug. So now she's scared all the time. I know you're not actually scared, but she does it for the hug, right?
Yeah. It's great that you observe that because, in some mommy's group, they would expel you if you, right?
Yep. So for our viewers who are really stuck, like we can get stuck in this wanting to feel good, but just not knowing how. From your research, from all of the amazing work that you do, what are some kind of simple ways that someone who feels maybe like in the slow lane when you were talking about, nobody gives me attention or everything's hopeless? Like, what are some ways we can kind of start to move to the middle lane?
Great, great. Well, first I'll just say one of the big helpful insights for me, I read a lot of the biographies of scientists. For the funniest reason, my husband and I would go on long car rides, and he's a scientist. And the only books we could agree on, I love biography and he likes science. So we listen to these biographies of scientists. And everybody you may have heard of, they had a crappy life. They were not applauded when they did their thing. They did their thing despite the fact that they were not applauded or supported or recognized, and often attacked and struggled and starved. So it's so valuable to know that, because you may think that you need all this encouragement and nurturing, like I can't do anything worthwhile until people start supporting me. That's psycho marketing, I guess, psychomarketing. But the reality is that humans all through history have taken action to meet their survival needs. And it's not like this, like people have to make me feel good before I can do something useful. Is I can do something useful and feel proud of myself. That's the middle lane. Get the pride feeling, the serotonin feeling, the recognition feeling by giving myself recognition, not just for nothing, but by actually doing things I'm proud of. And then not hating the world for failing to make you a superstar, but knowing that you're just one of 7 billion people who are all thinking they should be superstars. And again, it sounds so different from what we hear today, but if you watch the nature videos on David Attenborough, it's so easy to understand this social rivalry that our brain creates. And I have them on my website, innermammalinstitute.org/reading list.
Amazing. That's really, really cool, because it kind of brings to mind, okay, firstly, we can let go of the idea that other people are going to help boost us up, because they're not, right? Maybe, but that can't be the goal. So instead,
it can't be like the condition, like I won't start until you make me feel coached.
Right. So letting go of that and becoming your own kind of coach, becoming your own person who boosts you up. And is that as simple as just talking to ourselves, like nicely appreciating what we've done?
But also, if it's something really hard, give yourself a fish, like the dolphin gets a fish when it does a new spin. And you have to give yourself rewards in the short run. Like if I think I'm working for some goal, like maybe I'll get recognition 10 years from now, my brain and body are going to rebel and say, this stinks. The finish line is never there. You keep moving the finish line. So instead it's like, okay, I got 10 things to do. After I do the first 5, I'm going to have half a brownie. Okay. Yeah. And don't give yourself half a brownie until you do them.
Okay. Amazing. And in that way, you're kind of also celebrating, like you're celebrating that you achieved something, that you've accomplished something. And I find that in my work as a therapist, that's one thing that I kind of suggest to my clients, is to celebrate your wins, because it's so easy. Our brain immediately goes to the next thing because we're problem solvers. So we're not taking the time, or it's not natural for us to take the time to say like, oh, that was really good. Good job.
Yeah. And by the way, I just said a brownie in the interest of time. So I know people may be horrified by using food rewards. So I'll say first, in my book, Tame Your Anxiety, I get people to generate a long list of short run rewards. And I have a new book coming out called 14 Days to Sustainable Happiness, where you come up with sustainable rewards that don't hurt you in the long run. So one example would be if you have this novel that you've always wanted to read, but you never give yourself time, but you can read it in 10-minute increments. So you could say, as soon as I tackle this task that I hate, that scares me, I'm going to give myself 10 minutes of reading this novel. And then my brain's going to associate, wow, I want to do this hard stuff because I'm going to give myself a reward.
That's a really great idea. And that book sounds fantastic. 14 Days to Sustainable Happiness. That sounds amazing. So one of the ways is to kind of reward yourself for doing hard things. So if you find that you're a procrastinator or something like that, and you know that you have this amazing reward coming up, it might be easier to get over that procrastination hump. What about for those viewers out there who might identify as perfectionists? Like, I don't even start because I'm afraid it's not going to be good enough, that type of thing.
Yes, very good. Yes, I live with someone like that. So this is a good chance to talk about cortisol. So cortisol, people have heard of as the stress chemical, but we get wired for cortisol with myelinated pathways in the same way that we get wired for happy chemicals. So a simple example, my husband's father would criticize him if he made a mistake. There was a standard criticism. You should have thought about it more. Whenever you make a mistake, oh, I know, great example. Let's say you're walking and you trip a little and somebody says to you, be careful. Like, what? That's not helpful. I wasn't trying to trip. Now I got to be so careful every minute because somebody in your life when you were young gave you the idea that the reason you made a mistake was that you weren't careful enough. So it's like, there was a cliche in the Soviet Union where you could never get in trouble for doing nothing, but you could always get in trouble for whatever you did. So if I do nothing because I'm being careful, then I'll get respect, I'll sustain my serotonin, my oxytocin of attachment. But if I do something, I'm only going to get criticism. So some people had that experience when they were young. So that's a myelinated pathway in their brain. My experience was different. It was like, I'm going to get criticized no matter what I do. So I don't even listen to people's criticism.
Wow. So it's interesting, right? Because we try not to criticize our kids and stuff like that, but things come up that, they just come out so automatically. Like I often will say, or I'll hear my husband say, like, be careful when my daughter's doing anything. And it's interesting to think like it's just so ingrained. It's like whatever we went through, right? It's almost like you have to be like so super cautious or so super self-aware.
Yeah.
And kids are gonna, no matter what we do, we can try as hard as we can. There's gonna be stuff that comes up and it's just gonna make them stronger, right? So this is just for all the parents out there. Like, you don't have to be perfect.
Yes, exactly. But like if your husband said, be careful, it's possible that he really saw them doing something that was dangerous. And so you could be more specific, like, or sometimes you could share like, once I did this and this painful result happened. So I always use the story. I got fired from my first job because I didn't double check my work. So I learned to double check my work.
Right. So sharing stories like that is helpful. You're talking about for kids, right? It's helpful for them to kind of, and to relate to you too. Yeah. So, okay. So there's been so many things you've talked about. I'm curious about this new book that you have coming out, the 14 Days to Sustainable Happiness. Could you give us a little bit of a spoiler there? Like, what are some things we can do to kind of create sustainable happiness?
Sure. And I'm going to send it to you right now. Well, I'll wait till we're done. Okay. So again, this approach is not a list of specific things, but it's one lesson each day for 14 days that slowly leads you through everything I said, which is first understanding what turns on the happy chemicals in people in general, so that you don't find fault with yourself, you don't find fault with others, but this is how the animal brain works. The second step is to understand my unique individual pathways. How am I already stimulating my dopamine? How am I already stimulating my other happy chemicals? To understand that it's your core motivation, It's just a circuit. It's not reality. There could be many other realities, but you don't take them in, because when your senses take in information, you send them into the pathways that exist. So then the third stage is to build new pathways, a new pathway for serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin. And some people will want to use this for replacing a bad habit, such as an addiction, whereas other people might want to use it just for more general happiness. But the idea is you're designing your new strategy that's a sustainable behavior. And it's not like a laundry list, because very individual. We're each building on the pathways we have and trying to build something that fits my existing pathway. So for example, I like to write books. So I would build on something I already, here's an example. When I was young, I liked art. And now when I have these books, I hate marketing books. So I make artwork to attach to my marketing things, and then it makes it fun for me. So it's how can you make it fun for you by connecting what your animal brain wants with something you already like.
I love that. And it really promotes that idea of just knowing yourself, like it's so easy to try to read a blog post and say, okay, like this is what I should do. That's what I should do. But what you're saying is go into yourself, figure out what it is that works for you. What did you used to do as a kid? What did you really enjoy, right? Kind of getting back to those roots. And it's giving me so many ideas, even for myself, right? Things that you don't even think about, like, oh, when I was 7 years old, I loved to write poetry, like stuff like that, that you can kind of use right now to help you to tackle these harder tasks that you might find difficult for whatever reason. So if someone's going through maybe like an addiction or trying to change their addiction or stop their addiction, do you work with that quite often? What are some kind of
Yeah. So the idea, we talked about a cortisol pathway when a monkey smells a lion and runs up a tree. So cortisol makes you feel like I'm about to get eaten alive. I have to escape. And so when we're children, bad things happen to us, and cortisol creates that feeling of this is a crisis. I have to escape. And a child has no perspective. Cortisol turns on, like when a baby's not fed, baby can't feed itself. Cortisol turns on. And in the animal world, like, maybe your mother was a hunter-gatherer and she put you down and she couldn't find you. And so crying saved your life. So we have this emergency response. And when you're a kid, you have no perspective on it. So anything that works in that moment, when you feel bad, think of your worst moment. It's like we're all constantly reliving our worst moment of our childhood or of our past. So what made you feel better in that moment? And then your brain says, that's the way to go. So for addiction, very frequently, the pattern is that someone has a bad feeling about what's going on in their home, and then they go out and party, and it stops the bad feeling, just the way a crossword puzzle. Like if you're worried and you do a crossword puzzle, you can't replay an argument in your head while you're doing a crossword puzzle. So it's the same thing, but if you did the partying versus the crossword puzzle in your teen years when your neuroplasticity is high, then you got wired to do that rather than the crossword puzzle.
Okay. And so then as an adult, if whatever alcohol or drugs or gambling or whatever it was that kind of made you feel better as a teenager, if that's still your go-to and you're trying to think like, how do I even start the process? Or sometimes for people, it's overeating, right? Like whatever was kind of accessible and available. How do I start to kind of work through that and change it over? Would you suggest changing it over to something else rather than just like stopping cold turkey?
Oh, exactly. So the whole idea is it's a self-soothing habit. So the first step is to say, Everybody has self-soothing habits. Everybody needs self-soothing habits. Some of these habits are more sustainable than others. So if I have an unsustainable self-soothing habit, that means I feel better in the short run, but it hurts me in the long run. And when it hurts me in the long run, then I get more cortisol. So then I need more of this habit because I'm so worried about what I'm doing to myself. So that's a loop. And that loop is a real physical pathway in your brain. But it doesn't help to say, well, I have a disease. It's not my fault. I need treatment. Excuse me. I mean, I know people kill me for that. But the bottom line is, whatever you call it, whatever verbiage you use to call it, it's a pathway in your brain, and the solution is always to create a new pathway. So external treatment is just help. I have a chapter on help in my book, Status Games. So you can get help, but the help can't do it for you. It's a pathway in your brain, and your brain can create a new pathway by repeating a new choice. So you have to design your new choice. So you say, what will help me feel better in that moment when I feel bad? And then you know that the bad feeling is a chemical that your body eliminates in an hour. So in 20 minutes, you've eliminated half of it. In 40 minutes, you've eliminated 75% of it. So set a timer, and for 20 to 40 minutes, depending on how much time you have, do another self-soothing activity that fully engages your brain so that you're not busy replaying that bad loop. And also it starts with seeing that your urge is parallel to that urge in your childhood. So for some people with the addiction, it was when something bad happens, and other people, it's when something good happens and I want to celebrate because this is how you connect. But it's often both. And people say, oh yeah, that's how my family celebrated. But it's more than celebrating, because many families, if you don't join in the bad behavior, then they dump on you. Like, who do you think you are? So it's really a stress situation rather than a celebration, the way you may think.
So that kind of brings to mind like that situation of, if you don't join in, who do you think you are? Kind of like if your family celebrates by eating a lot of food together, and then you decide, oh, I'm trying to eat healthy, and then you get dumped on, right? Like that type of thing.
Yes, exactly. You get dumped on. And so that's why if you get dumped on, then that makes it easy to go into the whole poor me cycle. And then everybody dumps on me, nobody supports me. So the solution is to have realistic expectations and to say, they're struggling. So instead of waiting for them to rescue me, I'm going to rescue myself by saying, we humans have a mammal brain. We look for escape from threat. So I can understand my own threatened feelings and control my own self-soothing behavior. And I can feel good even though other people don't choose to feel good. And that's a subject of my other book, The Science of Positivity, which is how you have to choose it for yourself instead of waiting for the world to go positive before you can do it.
That is so empowering, right? To just the idea of separating yourself from others and saying, like, I have control over how I feel. So, and I know how my brain works. So it's not just about, thinking nice things, although maybe that helps, but it's kind of, I think, creating a list of the things that work for you, right? So that's kind of what you mentioned at the beginning, right? Create a list of what works for you, see which ones are sustainable. And then when you're starting to notice that loop, so that's where the self-awareness comes in. When you're starting to notice, I don't feel so good. I feel like reaching for this thing that has soothed me in the past, but that's not sustainable for me. So let me try something else for 20 or 40 minutes or however long I have. Maybe let me try to go for a walk, or let me try to go drink a coffee or with a friend or something like that, something that kind of distracts me for that amount of time. And then I can escape that loop, and I have to keep repeating it over and over and over every single day for how many days is it?
I don't use the number anymore. My first book said 45 days. So.
Okay. But for a while.
Yeah. But yeah, a while, 45, let's say 45 days. Oh, yeah.
Until it becomes more natural, like until you start to look for that other thing instead of the thing that that was not sustainable.
Yes. But let me caution you about going for a walk and having coffee with a friend.
Okay.
So going for a walk, how often when you go for a walk, you just get all upset because you think, I said this and then he said that and then I said this and then he said that and I know I'm right and why does he always do this? So you know how you can not really relax on a walk. So that doesn't count as a self-soothing activity if you do that. So I have audiobooks, and I always listen to an audiobook during my walk. But if you're listening to an audiobook that's full of like anger, tension, hostility, that doesn't count as a self-soothing activity. So you have to really monitor what's working for you. I use another example, yoga. A lot of people do yoga and then they get upset while they do yoga because their body is this and somebody else's body is that. Then if you have, coffee with a friend, maybe the friend pressures you in some way or whatever. So it's really important to take responsibility and say, what is really self-soothing for me? And don't feel guilty about taking time for that. And what I really recommend is it's something that uses your mind and body together that is best at wiping the slate clean, of not dwelling on that bad circuit, but that sort of wipes the slate clean to think about something else.
I love it.
Mind and body together is, I say, like gardening, playing a musical instrument, arts and crafts, cooking. These are examples of like good things to do when you're upset.
I love that. Okay. When I go for walks, I meditate and then I do positive affirmation. So I'm curious about your perspective on positive affirmation. What do you think about that?
Yeah, good. So positive affirmation, sort of a catch-22 with so many of these things is it works if you believe it, but if you don't believe it, it doesn't work. So let's break it down. Dopamine, your brain only gives it to you if you believe that you're approaching the reward. So if you say to yourself, I'm going to be a star, and you believe it and you take acting lessons and, but then, the cliche of like the person doesn't get a part and after a few years, they don't believe that they're going to be a star anymore. So they stop feeling dopamine when they take their acting lessons and go for auditions. So it's the same thing with positive affirmations. So the goal is really to be specific, but I really feel like it's more important to make it fun. So let's say the positive affirmation. Do you want to give me an example?
Life doesn't have to be perfect. Things are going to be okay. That type of thing. I try to get to neutral, but but I also have good, like more positive ones as well.
Okay. Well, so whatever it is, to break it down into smaller steps that you actually feel good about, so that triggers the positivity. So an example would be when you mention things will get better. So things will get better because I'm going to take this certain course of action and have confidence in my skill at actually implementing that course of action. Or you could say things will get better because life is full of randomness. And so if I have a bad day, I'll also have good days. It has to be something you believe.
Right. So something like, if it feels bad right now, but I know there are things that I can do to make it better, such as whatever the thing is. And I believe that will make me feel better, type of thing.
Exactly.
Oh, I like that. That's so much more specific. You can really into it.
And let's say if you're in like a war with somebody, like a bad will situation, a conflict, and many people are drawn to sort of replay the conflict in their head over and over, and you're always thinking what they should do. And then you just go into the same thought loop. People probably recognize that. And if you think about your childhood, you'll see that you had some exactly parallel situation where as a child you constantly dwelled on and suffered from this same situation. So you go into that pattern. So you don't have power over that other person. You can't change them, but you could change the pattern. So how could I see it in a different way? So if you always think the other person is wrong, doesn't mean like, oh, you have to go to the other extreme and say that they're right and you're wrong, but just find some other way to see the situation.
So some middle ground. So it's all kind of about getting into that middle lane, right? Where you're not too down about something or too up about something. You're kind of managing your expectations and figuring out what you can do to believe what it is that you're saying, right? So that's so interesting. Thank you, Loretta. Like this is changing my perspective on some deeply ingrained things that I learned in psychology. Right?
Yeah. I know. I think that's why I did this research, because I wasn't satisfied by the explanations I learned in psychology. But when you said about not to be too happy, it's not that I'm against being too happy, but to know that you don't control it and that it's a chemical that's metabolized in a few minutes. And then you habituate to that. Simple example is you think, I'll be happy forever if only I get X. But then we all know that once you get X, you're not happy forever. And to know that that's how your brain works.
Okay, so that's really interesting, because that kind of brings me to the point of like, when we think we'll buy like a big ticket item, like well, maybe the saving itself might be rewarding if you're saving up for something big ticket. But if we think, oh, I'm going to get this huge thing, like a new car or something like that, and that'll make me happy for a really long time. And then you're actually not happy for more than an afternoon or something like that. And you think there's something wrong with you. Well, no, that's just how your brain works. So sometimes, small rewards might be the way to go instead of the big stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But we want the big stuff too, in the sense of like a relationship. So, when I was dating my husband, I thought I would be happy forever if he married me. And I have to then remind myself of that every day, like go back into that feeling, because once you get the reward, you take it for granted and then you see the flaws in it. So you got to know how the brain works, and you still try to get that big reward. The promotion is a big example. A person thinks I'll be happy forever if I get that promotion. And then once you get the promotion, you're not happy forever, but you can try to remind yourself that it is something, because otherwise you just take it for granted.
So when you start to take things for granted, like a relationship or a promotion, one of the ways that it sounds like you're saying to kind of keep on appreciating it or feeling those happy chemicals is by bringing yourself back to that moment. So by appreciating, kind of thing. That's kind of what I'm hearing. Like if you appreciate, I didn't have this before and I really wanted it, and now I have it, you can kind of bring yourself there. Yeah. And is it also kind of appreciating just the little things that, like for instance, in a relationship, if you're appreciating the little things that your husband does or is, or things like that, would that also kind of bring you back to that place of feeling those happy chemicals?
Yes, but it's important again to do what's real for you. Like if you read in some magazine that your husband should do this, and then you're sort of judging him against that, that's a sort of a judging mind space, which doesn't make you as happy as, again, like you said, going into that moment when you really wanted them and you were so happy that you got them. That's you. That's a real pathway in your brain. And just remember that you wanted them. And when you didn't have them, what did you see in them? And see that.
So, and can you kind of overuse that? Like, can you think about that so much that it stops kind of working?
That's why in a relationship, both partners have to have a goal of their own. Like if you were looking for a relationship, that was like a goal. And then when you got it, then you didn't have the goal anymore. So you need another goal. And if you don't have that dopamine feeling of approaching a goal, it's not your partner's fault. It's because each individual is responsible for managing their own brain, by taking steps toward a goal. And again, we have to remember that our ancestors didn't have supermarkets or refrigerators. They had to look for food constantly. Our brain is designed to constantly look for something. When you don't have food, food makes us happy. So when we get food too easily, we have this whole brain that evolved to look to seek, and we have to give it other stuff to work on.
That's why some of us can feel so like, I don't know what the word is, like listless, or like, I'm looking for something. I don't know what it is, right? Lost, right? I don't know. I need to find purpose type of thing. Aimless. Yeah. So kind of the overarching message that I'm getting from this conversation, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is my takeaway so far, is that if you have something that's important that you're kind of working towards, you want to appreciate all the small wins along the way, right? So, and if you're finding it hard to motivate yourself, you want to have things that you can use to incentivize what you're trying to get to.
Yes.
And then when you reach your goal, your brain is going to look for new goals, and that's okay to look for a new goal, but you also want to appreciate what you've already done. Right. And so I see kind of like always like a forward movement is what makes us happy, when we're appreciating those small steps, and also going back and thinking about what we've done and how far we've come and what we've kind of achieved, to bring you back to that kind of dopamine feeling or whatever that.
Yeah, exactly. And a simple everyday way to look at it, because I know people get nervous about like big goals. Let's just say like you have on your mind a million things that you have to do. So you write down 10 things that you have to do. And then you say, I'm never going to get all 10 of them done. And so you can end every day with frustration that you haven't gotten enough done. But you could say, you know what, if I get the first 5 done, I'll be so happy, and then the next 10 I'll get done tomorrow. Something like that, where you'd say, oh, well, I'm exhausted after 5, but maybe I could squeeze in 1 or 2 more. Like maybe, but give yourself some breaks where you say, wow, I got these 5 things done and I'm going to have a break. I've earned it.
Yes. Okay. Love that. So you have a bunch of books. There's so much knowledge that you share online, and I love it. I follow you on LinkedIn. You're sharing stuff all the time. I absolutely love your LinkedIn posts. But your website is full of information as well. Sorry, what were you saying?
I just said thank you.
So good. So, and you have books, you have tons of interviews, you have your own YouTube channel. So can you share a little bit about kind of how someone could get introduced to your work?
Sure. So the Inner Mammal Institute is the framework, and the website innermammalinstitute.org. So the inner mammal is what controls your chemicals, the nonverbal limbic system. And I have lots of free resources, videos, podcasts, animations, infographics, also information about all of my books, and a really short introduction on my homepage. And also, if you opt in to get on my newsletter list, you get a free 5-day happy chemical jumpstart. So it's an introduction to each of the chemicals and also your power to rewire them.
Love that. And what, out of all your books, what's kind of a good starting off point for someone?
So my introductory book is called Habits of a Happy Brain, Retrain Your Brain to Boost Your Serotonin, Dopamine, Oxytocin, and Endorphin Levels. And it's also available in audio, and it's available in Spanish, Russian, Turkish, other German, French.
That's amazing. Wow. That's so awesome. Okay. Thank you so much, Loretta. This was so wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks for the great questions. And I'll send you the book right now.
Yes.